I'll sit on the right. It's safer.
You're on the right side of history, no. I can say that.
No, in India today, if you sit on the right, even if you're wearing a green kurta, you're okay. And I wore saffron in Delhi 2 days ago.
I'm aware.
And I was pulled up for that.
I'm aware you wore saffron in Delhi, and I just want to remind you, you are Anantamurthy said this, and Ram Guha has quoted it. Saffron is a beautiful color, and we shouldn't let anyone appropriate it. So I'm glad you wore that, and I'm glad you wore green today.
That's right. No one has any monopoly over
absolutely
over
any
color.
And the communists don't have a monopoly over red as well. So just clarifying. Thank you so much, Asia Society, for doing this and for that very kind introduction, Inakshi. But also thank you for all the excellent work that you do under Sangeeta's presidency and your leadership on art, culture, business, policy, politics. I know earlier in the week you had an event on textile heritage. You're doing this raucous conversation on elections today. I know there's more planned on art and culture in the future. So this is a real diverse offering. So I'm just reinforcing, if you're not a member of Asia Society, please become one. Thank you also to the NCPA for hosting us. I've seen the best talent perform on this stage. So it's a real pleasure. And I think only apt that Rajdeep's book should also be released here for Bombay. And thank you all for coming. There's a lot of really interesting things happening in Bombay today. I know there's a wonderful music performance at the Tata Theatre, staying with the NCPA theme. So I'm really glad you all could all come. And I can just say you will be rewarded because this is going to be an exciting conversation. So 2024. The title of Rajdeep's book, but also 2024 was the global year of elections. 49% or half the globe went to vote this year. 64 countries plus the European Union were to have elections, and then France called their snap elections. So we had 65 countries that went to vote. We had, our neighbors on the east and west both had really interesting elections. But Indian elections are always special. The political scientist Ornit Shani has written in her book that Indians became voters before they became citizens. She's referring to the fact that the electoral rolls for India were prepared before the constitution became in force. We're having this conversation 2 days after Constitution Day. We're having it 2 months before the 75th year of the Indian Republic. And the constitution was an emotive issue in this election, and I'm going to get into that to some degree in this conversation. But this election was interesting in several ways. It was the election that surprised India. And I can tell you it's a really thrilling, absorbing book. I was up till 2 a.m. reading it several days. You can see all my post-it notes. I strongly recommend that you buy it. Rajdeep is a great raconteur. The book is full of really interesting stories. Rajdeep, being a good journalist, keeps himself in the background, doesn't talk about himself much, but there is a story about him nearly getting arrested for sedition. I know his daughter's in the audience, and she kind of warned him about it. So please do buy the book. But apart from the interesting stories, for the thoughtful reader, which I know each of you are, this asks profound questions about the state of our democracy, about our constitutional values, about our institutions, the role of the media. And for me, it reiterated just how astute the Indian voter is. Rajdeep, I've watched your journalism growing up. I'm going to tell you later one of the first few times when I saw you. So it's really wonderful to be having this conversation with you. Not everyone knows that you actually studied law at Oxford. So that's one thing we have in common. But this is not going to be a cross-examination. It's going to be a constructive conversation. I'm going to start by asking you, why were we so surprised by this election? Was it hubris? Was it something else? You talk in the book about the pollsters getting it wrong, your own pollster crying on TV. There was the head of a media agency who asked the Prime Minister, is this election a mere formality? you talk very sportingly and candidly about the fact that you also got swayed. What happened?
First of all, thank you very much, Richa, for having me here. There's something very special about being in Mumbai, or Bombay, as you troublingly called it for some. But it is wonderful to be here. I was in Delhi 2 days ago at the launch of the book at the Nehru Memorial, which is again very special because it was 75 years since the constitution was adopted. But still, I am a Mumbaikar at heart who lives in Delhi, not by choice, but in exile. But it's been it's wonderful to have you all here, and thank you very much for coming. And thank you very much to Asia Society and NCPA for having this, and of course my publishers, HarperCollins. Why did the election surprise me? As I say in the book right at the very start, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I was certainly swayed by the drumbeat of Modi ki guarantee. Mr. Modi is a consummate communicator and a terrific politician. Definitions of what is a terrific politician, we can constantly debate over. But he knows how to win over audiences. He knows his messaging. And therefore, I thought, given the state of the opposition, this was a done deal. What I forgot, and many of us forgot, is that we live in the most complex, diverse country the world has ever seen. And therefore, if this election turned out to be the way it is, it has nothing to do with the state of the opposition, but it has to do a lot with the state of the wonderful people of this diverse country. Sitting in a Delhi or Noida studio, you forget that there are all kinds of people in all kinds of conditions who have various impulses that drive them. What drives a farm widow in Amravati, or what is it that a fisherman in Puducherry, or indeed some agriculture laborer in Bengal. This is the most diverse country in the world. And I think what eventually surprised us is what I call in the book the diversity dividend. And therefore, conceit was defeated by the courage of the average Indian. This belief that this country, this remarkably diverse country, can be one person, one leader, one party, one religion. It's not going to happen in India. And, for me, that was why this was, in some ways, a wake-up call. That don't get, as journalists particularly, we get too close to people or too close to individuals, to netas, and we get carried away by the surround sound. And I think that's what surprised us, that wow, there is the silent Indian out there.
Absolutely.
He or she may have different reasons to vote differently. And we should celebrate it. Mr. Modi won. Let's be honest. I mean, at the end of the day, he's Prime Minister for a third time. And in a year when you mentioned these 65 democracies, the truth is most incumbents have lost. And the reason they've lost, in my view, and I say it in the introduction, and this is something we don't look at hard enough, is post-COVID, a lot of people at the bottom of the pyramid have had a very tough time. Incomes have been lost, jobs have been lost. And then for someone to say, Sab changa si, or everything is well, and, 2047 Viksit Bharat. Nobody's worried about 2047 when they're worried about what will happen to me in 2022 or 24.
Absolutely.
And I think that, Richa, is what stood out for me, that the sound of the average Indian, which we often sort of ignore, and as I write in the book, it was a stand-up comedian sitting by the banks of the Ganga. Sham Rangila. Sitting by the banks of the Ganga in Varanasi, who said, Sir, ye India hai, yahan kuch bhi ho sakta hai.
Absolutely.
And it is that. This is the most wonderful country in the world. And yahan kuch bhi ho sakta hai. Yahan 13-year-old ko IPL ka 1 crore ka contract bhi mil sakta hai. Ya yahan a farm widow who I met, and her image stays in my mind because it only happened 2 weeks ago. And to think that her husband had committed suicide because they could not pay a 1 lakh loan. So, I mean, what kind of society? You can give 1 crore to a 13-year-old, and nobody came to even meet her in all these months. So, I mean, this is this country which can both sometimes infuriate you and sometimes just excite you. And that is what makes India so very special, which is why it was the election that surprised India.
No, thank you so much for that. Diversity dividend, I really, that's such a beautiful phrase. And a dividend it is. I think it really does, give us rich dividends. I'm really glad you said that. But I think I want to follow up on what you said about the incumbency disadvantage. This has been documented again by political scientists. 40 out of the 54 Western countries that went to election after COVID lost. This happened in South Korea, this happened in Japan, where the incumbents were punished. So should we have been more surprised by the election? Should the opposition have pushed and had a more of an advantage? You spoke in your book, actually, in chapter 2, you talk about the governance failures during COVID. This was pulled back to some degree by the vaccine rollout. But there is a K-shaped recovery in the economy. We know about the economic disparities. Oxfam has documented it. You just gave us these wonderful stories about it. Did the opposition lose, did they lose an advantage? I know you often have that wonderful line of how the opposition never loses an opportunity to lose an opportunity.
That was a line I used for Rahul Gandhi. And I used it both in my first and second book, and I thought that this time he deserves a break. Because he was among the few opposition leaders to actually not see this election as a done deal, for whatever it is. I mean, he's heading a party which, as we've just seen in Maharashtra, is frankly a party that completely needs to be, what do you say? Well, revamped is a very mild word. But it needs a complete overhaul. You can't be a brand of, look at we are in Tata Theatre, and I would want to give that example because the Tatas are a great example of reinvention, reimagination, 100-year-old great legacy brand, but then moving forward to in tune with the new India. And the Congress party has simply failed to do that. This is a new, I saw a photograph today out of Parliament, Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi, Priyanka Gandhi, Vadra, 3 Gandhis in Parliament, all very nice, but it's not New India. New India is meritocracy. New India is what I call the Dhoniization of India. You go into India B or India C, forget about the big metros, this driving aspiration, and I'm going to make sure that my son or daughter has a better life than me. And not because of who they come from nowhere, but they have to do it on their merit. And to my mind, somewhere down the line, the opposition is still caught in that old India. And I think the new India has to, the Congress party in particular has no narrative for urban India. You see, the urban Indian narrative has to be in tune with aspirational India. It can't be about caste and, let me, before I'm seen to be too critical of the opposition, let me say, even the ruling party in some part of the India plays to insecurities and anxieties of the old India, caste, community, divisions among people, religious polarization, batenge to katenge, yeah, ek hai to safe hai. I mean, all of this is preying on fears and anxieties of people. Why don't they talk about hospitals, talk about schools? How are you going to get urban infrastructure right? Those are the real issues of our times, and they're going to get worse. They're going to get worse with time. I mean, Delhi is going to have an election in 2 months from now. How many people in Delhi, how many political parties in Delhi will make air pollution a central issue? It won't be. Not even in middle-class colonies. I was just listening to a pollster before I came here. I was in Andheri at he has a, the Axis guy has this room, and he's getting actual people to speak about what are the issues in Delhi. And the issues they speak about: drainage, nali nahi hai, raste nahi hai, aspatal kharab hai, schools nahi hai. But who's going to put that out and make it a concrete agenda? Arvind Kejriwal attempted a bit of that in Delhi, but not entirely successfully. So I think the problem for the opposition in India has been that you've been out of sync with the energies and aspirations of New India. You can't be caught in dynastical politics. You can't be caught in preying on old-style anxieties. And I think even the ruling party in this country is playing a kind of politics that is avoidable. I don't think that New India eventually...
Well, that's now a mild word.
Sorry?
That's mild as well.
That's a mild word. Look, it troubles me endlessly if you're going to run politics in this country, and it is happening across the board, by looking for an enemy figure. Your constant search for enemy and praying to the worst in Indians, not the best in us. You should be praying, this is a wonderful country. You prayed, why don't you tap the energies and bring out the best in us, rather than at election time bringing out the worst in us by suggesting that your neighbor in some way who may belong to a different ethnicity or community or caste is responsible for who or what your condition is. And we've seen what that does, for example, to a Manipur, where Kukis and Meiteis today cannot have any dialogue with each other. We've seen the fact that we have the lowest number of Muslims in parliament in the history of this country. Just 24 Muslims in a parliament of 543 Indians. And, that to my mind is troubling. In 1980, and I give this as an example, in a constituency of Barech near Kanpur, candidate number 1 and 2 were both Muslims. Arif Muhammad Khan, and the second place was also a Muslim. I challenge anyone in a Hindu-dominated constituency today to put up a Muslim candidate and make him win. And that's the difference that's taken place in this country in the last 45 years. Today, political parties will not give a ticket to a Muslim. The Congress, the so-called secular vanguard party, didn't give a single Muslim a ticket in Maharashtra in the Lok Sabha elections. And then that space is occupied by extremist elements from within the Islamic community. So today, both Hindus and Muslim extremists feed on each other. And people become caught in the trap that this trap of the sort of kind of hate politics that is unleashed or divisive politics that is unleashed. And it's deeply troubling for me. I mean, Maharashtra's politicians talk of Phule, Shahu, Ambedkar and do everything to destroy their legacy. And then you wonder, and people even in these audiences, sometimes I scratch them. Here they'll be politically correct, take them out in a one-on-one and they say, somewhere wo sab Bangladesh se aate hai na.
There's a lot of bigotry that comes out of the woodwork.
I mean, the kind of bigotry that I see in very, very polite audiences is deeply troubling. And I hope that one day all of us look at ourselves in the mirror and recognize that we are the most diverse society in the world. And diversity must be acceptance of the other, not othering someone. I hope that happens one day.
Thank you.
I mean, I said at the end, Fir Subah Hogi. The great Sahir Ludhianvi, who was a magician, says, Ye Subhat Kabhi To Aayegi.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for your brave and courageous journalism and being so outspoken about this very important issue. And in fact, you raised the point about a Muslim standing from a Hindu majority constituency, and you have a wonderful story about Ikra Hassan in the book that I'm going to ask you about later when we talk about the reasons for hope and the reasons for Subh Kabhi To Aayegi. But I'm going to, while there is this divisive politics, it is true that that voters are more astute than we imagine. And you have this wonderful line in your book, and I was just going to read it out because, you say the BJP didn't quite win, the opposition didn't quite win. So who won, right? The real winner of this election is the unheralded Indian voter. Millions of anonymous voters bear the brunt of a grossly unequal society in silence, but know how and when to strike back in their own quiet, dignified way. The great Indian voter has shown that the power of the inked finger isn't dead, and neither is Indian democracy. I want to probe you a little bit more, and you alluded to it already, in terms of what the Indian voter wants and their role in saving democracy, in preserving constitutional values.
Look, I'm not, we must also beyond the point not sort of celebrate the Indian voter also too much. I've seen Indian voters getting carried away in Tamil Nadu by the mixer grinder. Politics that the Dravida party started there now has spread to every corner in this country. I mean, money power has grossly distorted our political system. This election in Maharashtra perhaps was the election which saw the maximum amounts of monies being given to people. I have an old Sarpanch friend from my travels in the 1990s in Marathwada. And he rang me up a week ago and said, Sahib, मी एवढे पैसे कधी बघितलेच नाहीये. ते म्हणालो किती? त्याने 5 कोटी आमच्या गावात आले. And I said, ते करणार काय? नाही त्यांनी सांगितले सर्वात distribute करा. One of the big, I said this in Delhi with MPs and MLAs there. I said, all of you start your career with a lie, because the affidavit is said that you will spend 95 lakhs, I think, if you're Lok Sabha, and 45 if you're MLA. All of you spend in crores. And I was originally told it was Tamil Nadu and the southern states that spent in several crores. Maharashtra has joined the league. And, most of them have connections to real estate. So they deal in cash. And it's a cash and carry politics. It's astonishing that 1 in every 3 politicians, MLAs of Maharashtra has been in more than one party for the last 10 years. So it's been defection politics. I met someone just now, I'm staying at the Trident. And one of the interesting stories that I was told is that one of the MLAs who defected, apart from cash, also said, "Mujhe sweet chahiye 2 saal ke liye Trident mein," which he got. There's a permanent suite to one of these MLAs who became a minister. Because it's close to Vidhan Sabha, it's easy to. I don't know whether he got it in his name. He might have got it in the name of an associate. But politics in this country, therefore, as a result of money, has been totally de-ideologized. You can switch sides across the board. And I think the ADR report says about 550 MLAs and MPs have switched sides in the last, between 2014 and 21. A majority of them towards the BJP because the BJP is the party in power. But once you allow this level of defection, it's difficult to stop it. And that's where the voter comes in. The voters voted all of them back. All the so-called Pannas Khoke Ekdam okay MLAs of Maharashtra have all got re-elected without exception. So what, in my home, one of my other home states of Goa, every time they switch sides, they get re-elected. I say, forget Ayaram, Gayaram, it's Aya D'Souza, Gaya D'Souza now. Or Aya Patil, Gaya Patil. They all get elected. So where is the voter punishing them? Is the voter happy with that 1,500 under the Ladki Bahin scheme that they were providing? Yes, they are. And the reason for it is, somebody before the discussion, but this is freebies. It may be a freebie to you. Absolutely. But for a woman who earns 20,000 a month at best, or 10,000, that 1,500 has changed her life. I asked one of them when I was traveling in Maharashtra, they'd got 3,000, including a Diwali bonus this time, in the month of October. Look at how cleverly it was timed also. That the role of the EC deserves a separate book. But,
I have questions about that.
It was time. And I said, "Tumi kela kai paisha kyun?" "Sir, pahyanda ami pizza party keli." This was in Thane. So please think about it. You can sit here, we can sit in these polite audiences and say freebies. But 1,500 changes lives. So.
No, I agree with that. And I'm going to say something that will probably be a little unpopular with this audience. Right? When there's money given to large corporations, that's a subsidy. And that's something that's celebrated. But when we give money to people for whom 1,000 rupees is a lot of money, we treat that as a sop and revdi and whatnot. And I think maybe you're being a little harsh on the Indian voter after writing that beautiful line. Because I have a slightly different view on this. I think we briefly discussed it previously. I think the Indian voter does actually often does vote for important things like the Constitution. Steve Levitsky, who wrote the book Why Democracies Die, says that it is not for the average voter to save democracy. That is something for the elite and the institutions to do. And I think that Indian voters have often saved Indian democracy. I think the Constitution was a major emotive issue in this election for good reason. When they said 400 par, they probably wanted to amend the Constitution. And voters sort of pushed back against that. And I would actually argue that perhaps institutions are failing the Indian voter. You speak of the ECI. The ECI is an important institution in the Indian democracy. Is it playing the role of a fair arbiter? Is it, by allowing money to flow in politics the way it does, is it doing that? We know agencies are being weaponized. You have a beautifully reported, revealing story about the Enforcement Directorate in your book. The legislature was actually non-existent in the last 5 years. We had important criminal law reform happen with 143 MPs getting suspended. So perhaps the institutions are failing the Indian voter as well.
No, sure they are. Of course. I mean, that goes without saying that we've seen a kind of institutional diminution and degradation, which is very dangerous for our democracy. But I don't, the voter who in 2024 voted in the name of Samvidhan, I think again voted more out of a sense of fear and anxiety. I don't think that...
Was it a fair sense of fear and anxiety given
There was a bit of I'm not entirely convinced about that narrative about Samvidhan Khatre mein hai. So I think that narrative was at one level used by the opposition to spread the fear that reservations will go away, you will lose some of your benefits and rights. So I'm not entirely convinced that voters were out there to save the constitution. Some of them were, but don't forget, many of those same voters who voted in May in a particular way, 5 months later in Maharashtra voted very differently.
And I'm going to argue that that is actually the Indian voter being astute, because the constitution is an issue for parliamentary elections, but is not for assembly elections.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, yes and no. I mean, the voter is to a large extent transactional at times. The voter is ideological at times. But my own sense is that we place too much of responsibility on the Indian voter. Sure. Safeguarding constitution is not the job of the voter. Safeguarding institutions is not the job of the voter. You're in power. You're supposed to ensure that the enforcement directorate operates equally, not just in opposition-ruled states. You're supposed to ensure that the Election Commission of India is not like the Pakistani umpires of the 1980s, who decided that they were the 12th men for the Pakistani cricket team. You have to ensure at all times, that you ensure an element of fair play. And that's not the job of the voter. That's the job of the guardians of the constitution. That's the job of those who are elected to parliament. That's the job of bureaucrats. That's the job of judiciary. And that's the job of us in the media. I mean, us in the media, have we told truth to power? Has the judiciary really played the role it is? For example, to safeguard fundamental rights of Kashmiris. Absolutely. Article 370 led to, for 1 year at least, for 1 year at least, led to a number of people in jail.
Internet shutdowns continue.
Yeah, so internet shutdowns continued, and where was the courts? The courts sat on a habeas corpus petition of the people in Kashmir who were behind bars for more than a year. It's nice to lecture at Harvard or wherever you go in your judicial robes and talk about the right to life and liberty. Why didn't you protect the right to life and liberty of Kashmiris? You will open the Supreme Court of this country on a Saturday to ensure bail is given to a journalist because he's an editor. But you will never open the Supreme Court for a Kashmiri. And ask yourself, then what kind of a judicial system are you? Who do you protect then? Similarly, us in the media. We will make a big deal about breaking news if there is a small incident in Noida or Delhi. But look at what has happened in Manipur. 20 months, 2 communities are divided and still live in refugee camps. How much of coverage do you give to Manipur? And therefore, so we, the so-called defenders of democracy, are the ones who failed democracy. Let's not blame the voter. Voter, bichara, 1500 rupees usko mil rahe, he's happy, or she's happy, more importantly. This election showed the power of the woman. And that is one of the changes in Indian election, Richa, that I've seen. Never before have women been as important as they are now. And thank God for that. About time. No, the problem is that we don't give enough women, we don't make them, this state has never had a woman chief minister.
That's right.
We talk about, whenever Maharashtra celebrates women, they talk about Savitri Phule, all 100 years ago. Where are the modern day Maharashtrian women to celebrate? But in general, gender power is something which is changing. And as I saw in this election, the woman was voting sometimes very differently to the man. मी माझ्या नवऱ्याला कोणाला देऊ दे, मी तर देणार वोट जे मला द्यायचं आहे. And I think that's great.
That's a sense of agency being returned to women voters.
Slowly, but happening.
No, absolutely. Excellent. Which is exactly why I think, to your point, which is why I said institutions are failing the Indian voter.
Absolutely.
And I think they're voting in economically, possibly politically rational ways, and institutions are failing them. You talk about money in politics, you talked about the judiciary. It's funny, actually, the Romans, Plutarch has talked about how money is corrupting politics way back at that time, but I think it's quite excessive now, and with the judiciary, you talked about 370, but even the electoral bonds case is something that they actually sat on for several years before they finally gave a good judgment. But we have to talk about the media because you brought it up and because you write about it very candidly in the book as well. You said mea culpa maximus right in the beginning of the book and right at the beginning of this talk. I do think that the media is failing us, and it's because of a range of complex reasons, including corporate ownership of media. And there are corporate owners of media who have contributed to electoral bonds as well, and have political connections that own media channels. But you also speak of the intense levers of power used against the media. So Pegasus, for instance, court cases, raids, sedition charges. So it is difficult for the media, and I'd love to hear you comment on what their role should be. In fact, I remember a certain media owner, executive, saying the media cannot play the role of the opposition. But are they playing the role that they are to play, which is speaking truth to power and reporting what's on the ground, whether in Manipur or Vidarbha or elsewhere?
You know, Richa, when I wrote the chapter on the media, is the 14th and last chapter of the book. My original idea was I won't write on the media. It's ridiculous to be part of the media and then sort of gaze inwards, perhaps gaze at people who you know well. But I felt I would be unfair to the next generation 20 years from now who may want to know what happened in this decade that we are living through, the kind of bruising decade. And therefore, with all the caveats that I could put in place, I know Yogendra Yadav the other day told me, you must write a book on the media. And I said, I will do it when I retire, which might well happen soon. But the fact
I hope not.
No, but the fact is the media needs to be looked at. And I'll give you an example. Just yesterday, the headlines were, CBI closes case against Pranoy Roy and Radhika Roy against NDTV, finds no wrongdoing. Just look at the chronology of the case. Chronology samajhiye, to use one of our ministers. Just think of the chronology. 2016-17, they are raided, they are put ED cases, and CBI cases. There are about 10 times that Pranoy has to go to the ED office, maybe more. I think Radhika went 10 times. I know that I used them by first name because they were people I worked with them for 11 years.
Career with them.
Yeah, and wonderful people put through the ringer. Very few people in my profession stood up. Dr. Roy was going from Mumbai airport to celebrate the 70th year of his wife. They were stopped at the airport and made to go back, saying that, you're on a watch list and therefore we cannot let you go abroad. All of that happened to them. In 2022, their company was sold off and hostile takeover by the Adanis. And 2 years later, what happens? Lo and behold, no wrongdoing. In India, the process is the punishment. And it has a chilling effect on all of us in the media, because every media owner then wonders, will I be next? Now, in any other democracy, you would have had checks and balances put in place. And that's why I think, at times our democracy is still very fragile. Democracy is more than one person, one vote. It's more than adult franchise. It's about vibrant institutions that protect you when the system results in executive overreach. And I write about it very candidly there, about how someone at the top, I won't say it there, I want you to read it, said, aren't they already finished?
Yeah.
Openly tells an editor that I will finish NDTV. Who stood up? All of you may watch the channel. Who stood up? Did anybody? Fear cannot be the basis of democracy. Democracy democracy flourishes when you give up fear and you speak truth to power. But we don't, because it happened to the other guy. As long as it doesn't happen to us, we don't care. And I think the decline of the media in terms of telling those stories, the truth to power, is one of the major failings, Richa, along with the judiciary. I mean, the judiciary has opened a can of worms by just that one order on the Gyanvapi mosque, saying it allows you now to go and look whether a temple or a mosque, whether a temple existed where there's a mosque today. And in every small district court, activist is going and saying, "Hame wo mosque ke niche temple tha 600 saal pehle." Do you know what you've unleashed in a country like ours? Even though there's the Places of Worship Act, which had said status quo on all of this.
No, it's been...
So I think, and the media won't talk about it with the force that we should, right? We've allowed those in power, whether in any state, any party, and this is beyond parties. Every government today knows how to manage, I use the word manage, or muzzle the media. I mean, think about it. NewsClick, a small portal. The editor of that spent 6 months in jail. For what? Because some guy in New York Times wrote an article saying that they've got the money through illegal means. He's got all the Reserve Bank of India clearances. And he's left with 45 paise in his bank account. 45 paise left in his bank account of NewsClick. I mean, where is the outrage? Where is the anger? Anger is good sometimes. We need to get angry more often. We don't get angry. We're too polite to get angry. And that's why I worry about, the health of our democracy. 2024, as I call it, is an interval. Abhi tak picture baki hai.
Agreed. And because you say picture baki hai, and we don't want to, we don't want to be on this despondent note, you also have stories of hope.
Absolutely.
You have these wonderful stories in the book about giant slayers. I mentioned one, Ikra Hassan, who gave her maiden speech in Parliament, I think, a few days ago. Sanjana Jatav, Chandrasekhar Azad. I'd like you, for this audience, to tell one or two of these stories. Ikra and Sanjana Jatav are my two favorites, so maybe those two, and then we'll open up for questions.
I don't want to leave this audience feeling too despondent. This is a wonderful country, and therefore there are these great stories of hope. Sanjana Jatav is a 26-year-old mother of two Dalit. Lost the Vidhan Sabha election in December by 600 votes, but still determinedly contested. Her husband is a low constable in the Rajasthan police. He was threatened and said, "Tumhari biwi ko mat chunav ladao, otherwise we will remove you from your job." He said, "Nahi," and this is where I admire, there are some good men also. He said, "Nahi, biwi ladegi. Aapko jo karna hai mujhe karo." And she won the election against the entire army. It was in the Chief Minister's constituency in Rajasthan. And how did she celebrate? She had a dance move on Instagram. And one of the things that Instagram has done is Instagram has leveled playing field.
Absolutely.
You see, there is another Rajasthan guy.
The mainstream media.
Yeah, you see, there's a guy called Rajkumar Roat, the leader of this great new party called BAP, Bharat Adivasi Party.
Right.
He took on a minister, 6-time MP. Rajkumar drives, he and his guys are bikers, they go through Baswada. And you should see them. He came to see me in this t-shirt, I think, which said New York Yankees or something. And I said, "Yaar, ye kya hai?" He's a 30-year-old, but he's an Instagram sensation among the young tribal youth. They crowdsourced their way and defeated the minister. Or Geniben Thakur in Banaskantha, taking on the might of the entire Banaskantha dairy and the entire might of the BJP machine of Gujarat, the first non-BJP candidate to win in Gujarat in 15 years. Housewife, and but crowdsourced her way. In fact, the story goes, she said, "I'll ring up Amit Shah also and ask him to help me in my campaign. Thoda unse bhi paisa lete hain." But these are unbelievable stories. You mentioned Ikra. Ikra was Ikra has one advantage. She was a PhD student at SOAS. One advantage that she comes from a family where her father, grandfather were all politicians. But still, to go through Kairana, knocking on the door, a Muslim young woman, knocking on doors, intelligent, articulate, erudite, and then still winning. I mean, 30% Muslim population, so maybe she got that vote, and maybe she need. But still, let's not,
minimize her achievement.
Yeah, it's a great achievement. And there are lots, this country, therefore, the reason I remain optimistic about India for all the despondency, is country mein kuch bhi ho sakta hai. It is to me, these are the Dhoniization stories. I mean, out of all the Indian cricketers, the one I have, I embrace more than any other is Mahendra Singh Dhoni, because it's the journey of a lifetime. If you're a railway constable railway ticket collector in Kharagpur station, and 10 years later you're at the Wankhede lifting the trophy.
Absolutely.
Hats off to you. And I'll never forget his line as, cricket comes. But it's a line for all Indians. He said, I asked him once, last over, 20 runs to get, don't you feel pressure? He said, sir, pressure ये होता है कि वो ट्रेन स्टेशन में जब ये बंगाली चढ़ते हैं ना, वो टिकट के बिना चढ़ते हैं to make sure कि टिकटलेस कोई नहीं जाएगा. That is pressure. उसके बाद ये क्या pressure है?
Right.
And maybe that's the story of a Sanjana Jatav. Once you've gone through all the hardships of life, or Rajkumar Roat, or Chandrasekhar Azad, who I fear will eventually, sadly, seems to have some of the attributes that will lead him in the direction of some leaders, Dalit leaders who've lost their way. and become larger than life. That's dangerous, always for anyone.
Yes.
In life as well. But these are all stories of hope. I mean, engineer Rashid, look at his story. Fought from jail in Kashmir and defeated Omar Abdullah and Sajjad Lone. And look at how politics works. He was given bail under UAPA for 2 weeks only because the ruling party there wanted to divide the National Conference vote during the assembly elections. Elections over, he failed in the assembly elections, he's back in jail. Can't even go to parliament. And the case against him is so weak. It's not funny. I mean, so that's the troubling part of it. But he defeated, and what was his slogan? Tihar ka badla vote se. And every but the same Kashmiris, having rewarded him in the Lok Sabha, when it came to Vidhan Sabha, said, nahi, ab tum government ki B team ho gaye ho. Didn't vote for him. Now that is the intelligence of the Indian voter.
That's the astuteness of the Indian voter.
Indian voter जान जाता है, ये public है, ये सब जानती है, अंदर क्या है, बाहर क्या है.
Absolutely. One of my favorite quotes about India is, whatever you say about India, the opposite could also be true.
Yeah, we are a 50-50 country.
Absolutely. And you combine all those contradictions in your book so beautifully. So please do buy it and have it signed by Rajdeep.